Hello and welcome. So this video is about my top tips for Zwift racing. So there's going to be quite a few beginner, intermediate and advanced tips. I'll probably forget a few, so if you have some of your own tips, be sure to whack them down there in the comments. I've been racing on Zwift for about a year, so this is basically all I know about Zwift, so hopefully you can find it useful. Alright, let's jump straight in. So there's some knowledge which I assume you already know. So firstly, what Zwift is, I'll just do a quick rundown. Basically, it's you riding your bike in your living room, but your power basically gets transferred to the computer game, and then you can compete with other people across the internet. So what you need to race on Zwift is a indoor trainer and a bike. So basically this is what transfers the data from your riding into the game. And then last one, you need to know how to ride a bike. Okay, so beginner tips, let's jump straight in. So firstly, you want to optimize your setup. So this picture on the side is a very nice setup. It's not mine, unfortunately. So one good thing you really need is a lot of fans. You're going to be riding a lot and it's going to be very exhausting and you're going to be pushing yourself to your limit. So a lot of fans is a good thing. The more the merrier. I have two fans. One of them is in front of me aimed at my chest and one of them is at the side pointing to my chest, but from the side as well. So yeah, basically the best fans to get are either big ones or very powerful ones. The more fans you have, the better you will perform basically. Okay, what else you need is a table within arm's reach. So on this table, you can put your towel and your food or your drink, and you will want these basically. If you get into longer rides, you'll definitely want some food on hand, maybe gels, banana, whatever you like, and lots of water. If you're inside, you'll be sweating a lot more than you do outside because it's just so much hotter. And a towel is just very useful to stop yourself sweating all over your expensive bike. Big screen. Okay, so you can run Zwift on basically anything from like a mobile phone to a really powerful computer, but it is much easier to race on a big screen because there's lots of numbers and you will be able to see these much easier if you're on a big screen. I've got mine on like a 40-inch TV. These days, TVs like that aren't even that expensive. You can get them for like £100, £200. So compared to the cost of a bike, it's not even that much really. Companion app or a keyboard and mouse. So this is so you can click through the menus, make sure you can use your power-ups and stuff like that. Very important to be able to use this while you're in a race. So that's the first one, an optimized setup, very important to do this. I'll whack a picture of my own setup up there and you can see how awful mine is. Actually, it's not that bad. It's definitely got much better over time. So next one, power-ups. When you're racing in Zwift, you get lots and lots of power-ups and it's very important to know what they do. So the first two are these ones, which is an XP boost. And when you're racing, these are not important at all. You can basically just ignore these. You don't want to get these because they don't do anything. So the next one is a feather. This one is pretty simple. It just makes you lighter. It reduces your weight by 10% for 15 seconds. So you want to be using your feather on a hill. If you don't use it on a hill, it's pretty much a waste. A good time to use this is if you're a heavier rider and you're trying to stick with a group when they're going up a hill, or maybe if you're a lighter rider and you want to try and break away on a hill. So yeah, use your feather on the hill, pretty simple stuff. Next one, this is the draft van. So this increases the draft effect you feel by 50% for 30 seconds. So this one you want to use when you're following someone. So you're behind someone in their draft. So you don't want to use this when you're on your own basically, or when you're in the wind. This is best used in high-speed situations, like when you're going downhill or on the flats. So next one is the aero helmet. This one makes you more aerodynamic for 15 seconds. It's very, very useful. This is probably the most useful one in the game. You use it on sprint finishes and high-speed situations. Normally a race on Zwift will come down to a group sprint, and if you have an aero helmet, you can get an extra few 2 or 3 miles an hour maybe, and that will really help you. So yeah, aero helmet, very good. Make sure you save it till the end if you get one. So next one is the burrito. This one turns off drafting for all riders for 10 seconds. This one is useful when you want to break away from someone. So if you're trying to make a gap, you use your power up and then they can't draft you for 10 seconds. So that is a good opportunity to try to make a gap. So yeah, that one's not too bad, the burrito. Next one is the ghost. This one's pretty obvious. This one just makes you invisible for 10 seconds. This is good if you want to put down some power without anyone noticing. Yeah, so that's the ghost. Very, very easy. Okay, next one is the steamroller. This one reduces your rolling resistance for 30 seconds. This one's a bit confusing. So this one you want to use on rough surfaces like gravel or sand, and then it will make it feel as if you're riding on smooth road. So this one's good to use on routes with lots of different surfaces like cobble or gravel. So yeah, you'll get a sense of this as you play the game more. Anvil, this one is good. This one makes you heavier for 30 seconds. This one you want to use only on descents really. So you get to the top of the hill, use your anvil, and it will make you so much faster going down the hill. Okay, so that is all of the power-ups done. That was pretty quick. Let's move on. So let's do some general stuff about the power-ups. The power-ups are given when you go through an arch. So the arch might look like this, or it might look like something else. So you get used to what they look like. If you have a power-up and you don't use it, you won't get a new one. So you've got to use your current power-up before you get to the arch, otherwise you just waste it. So not all events use all of the power-ups. You can check the description of the event to see which power-ups you'll be able to get. Next one, let's see. Oh yeah, okay. Press the spacebar to activate your power-up. And you can also use the companion app as well. So that's why it's important to have your keyboard or mouse or like your phone next to you. Okay, so the next beginner tip is staying in the draft. So the draft is important because when you're in the draft, you save so much energy. To know if you're in the draft, you need to look at your rider's position. If your rider is sitting up, it means he is in the draft, and if he's sitting down, it means he's not in the draft. So to get the draft, you need to be 5 meters or closer to the person in front of you, and as you get closer to them, the draft effect gets stronger. So you save about 30% of your energy if you're sitting in the draft. So for example, if someone is riding at 200 watts, you can ride behind them at about 140 watts. So you can save a lot of energy by staying in the draft. This is also important if you're trying to break away. If you're trying to make a gap, try to make sure it's bigger than 5 meters. Otherwise, the people behind you will be able to stay with you easier because they don't have to work as hard. Okay, next one. Oh, Tron riders never sit up. So that's important as well. If you've got the Tron bike, I'm sure you already know a lot about the game, so you probably don't need that tip. Next one is basic strategy. So Zwift races normally follow the same sort of pattern. Firstly, it will be a very strong start. There's normally about 1 or 2 minutes where you are going 100% and it is really difficult to stay with the group. It's important you stick with the group because, like I said, you want to be in the draft. Otherwise, you will get dropped really quickly and you'll have to work really hard to get back with everyone. So after a few minutes, it will settle down to a more normal pace. So that's basically how it is for the rest of the race. You'll just be sitting in the draft, trying to conserve energy until the end. Some general strategy is there will be attacks on hills. Normally, that's where the attacks happen. So you want to be aware of that and ready to respond if someone goes for it. And normally most races will end in a sprint finish, and you want to be able to have a good sprint to be able to stick with everyone. Okay, so that's basic strategy down. Race categories. So in Zwift, there are 4 categories. So D is the lowest category and A is the highest category. So this is your functional threshold power divided by your weight. So for example, if you weigh 100 kilograms and you have an FTP of 100, your watts per kilogram will be 1. And if you weigh 100 kilograms and you have an FTP of 250, your watts per kilogram will be 2.5. So you can either do an FTP test or a ramp test to find this out, and then you can choose which category you want to be in. In the Zwift settings, you need to make sure your height and weight is correct because Zwift uses this to calculate how fast you're going. So if you don't set your height and weight correctly, you're cheating the game, and most importantly, you're cheating yourself. Okay, so next beginner tip is to prepare early. So it's always good to get on the bike quite a bit before the race starts. I like to give it 20 minutes to half an hour. So that gives you time to fix any problems. Sometimes like your cadence sensor might not work, or like you might have an issue with like the internet or something like that. So getting on early gives you some time to sort that out. And let's assume there aren't any hardware issues. You can also get a good warm-up in. So this is very important because, like I said, the races always start with a lot of power. So getting a good warm-up in allows you to be ready to go for it straight away. And finally, you can make sure you have everything you need. So you can check you've got your water, your towel, your phone, your headphones, whatever you need. You can make sure you've got them before the race starts. Okay, what is next? Race choice. Okay, so not all races are the same, obviously. So you need to know the elevation, the distance, and that way you know what you're getting yourself in for. If you just pick a race at random, it could be anything. You could be on the bike for like 3 hours because some of these races are really long. And on the other hand, you could have picked a race that is like 3 kilometers long and that would be like a 5-10 minute race. So yeah, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Some races are busier than others, and that depends really on what time you get on. So I live in Asia and my time zone is pretty awful for this. So most of the races I enter are pretty quiet and it's not that great. So More popular time zones would be like Europe and America, and you should get some pretty busy races there, like 50, 100 people. Obviously, the busier races are going to be much more competitive. So some races also have category enforcement. This means you can't enter a category below what you are. So this just means that cheaters aren't allowed to play. So yeah, that's the sort of races which are really more fun, to be honest. Know people who are much better than they should be in your race. And one important thing is setting your expectations. It is in the end a race, and you can't expect to win all of them. And if you do expect to win every race, you'll probably be a bit depressed because it is quite hard. I've been racing for like a year and I've won like 5 or 6 races. So go into it with realistic expectations and you will be much happier with yourself. So next beginner tip is get fitter. So obviously riding your bike is the whole aim is to get fitter, isn't it? So Zwift has built-in training plans which you can use. These are a bit more structured than just racing. This is better if you want to gain more long-term fitness. I actually used one of these training plans myself and I gained 30 watts. So if you want to see that, there'll be a link in the corner. You can also use other training software like Wahoo System or Trainer Road. Both of those are alternatives you can try, but obviously then you have to spend more money. So sometimes you just don't really fancy doing a really competitive race. It's good to have a training plan going on as well, and then you can do some like base riding. Following a training plan is definitely so much more productive than just racing all the time. Okay, so that's the end of the beginner tips. Now let's go into intermediate tips. These ones might be a bit more interesting. Right, so this one actually is probably more a beginner one as well. So it's important to know the route. This will allow you to know what you're getting into. So Zwift Insider has details for most of them. Like, for example, it can show you the elevation profile and show you how steep the hills are, how long the hills are. So if you know all of this, you'll know when people are likely to attack and when you need to be ready. Knowing the route is very important. It's difficult to just memorize the routes. I've been playing for a year and I know like 5 or 6 of them because there's just so many roads in this game. So yeah, this is something you will definitely pick up as time goes on. And if you don't know the route, just looking at this map before you start will give you a good idea of what to expect. Okay, next one, practice your sprints. So like I said, Zwift races normally end in a big group sprint. So having a good sprint is an important part of the game. So you need good form, which I will admit I didn't ever really have, and it's something you need to practice. So I won't tell you how to do a good sprint. That's something you can look up yourself. There's loads of good videos on YouTube about good sprinting form. And you need to know how long you can last on your sprint. Normally sprints last about 15 seconds, so you need to know when you should go. Sometimes the sprints go from like 500 meters, sometimes they go from like 300 meters or 200 meters, and it really depends on the gradient of the finish line as well. These are just things you'll pick up as you do more races. So obviously not everyone can be good at sprinting, you know, we all have like different sized bodies and we're good at different things. Some of us are good at climbing, some are good at sprinting, for example. So for example, if you're a lighter rider, perhaps you should try to break away on the hills and get a little breakaway going with some other people. But yeah, if sprinting isn't your strong point, you definitely need to think about your strategy a bit more. There's lots of things you could do. Even sprinting really early could catch lots of people by surprise. Lots of people are like set in their ways. They don't expect anyone to do anything different. So yeah, maybe going for like a 1 kilometer long sprint, you could catch a lot of people napping and they might not even react really. Okay, next one, bike choice. So on Zwift, there are lots and lots of different bikes. You've got lightweight bikes, aero bikes, TT bikes, gravel bikes, mountain bikes. It just goes on and on. So most of these bikes are level locked and you need to save up drops, which is just your money, to buy them, and a lot of them are quite expensive. So you need to be smart when you're buying your bikes, because until you get to a really high level, you probably won't have enough money to buy the ones you want. So there are lots of websites where you can look up what bikes are best for what routes. You can go on Zwift Insider, that has lots of good options. You also need to choose a good set of wheels as well. Zwift Insider also has lots of articles on that, so it's a good place to start. So lightweight bikes. These ones are best for routes with lots and lots of climbing. Like if you're doing Alp to Zwift, for example, you definitely want to have a lightweight bike. Aero bikes. So aero bikes are good for flat or rolling routes. These are generally the best all-round bikes as well. So if you have lots of climbing followed by lots of descending, normally it's best to go for the aero bike as well, because you'll just make up the time on the descent anyway. So yeah, that's aero bikes, generally the best choice if you just want a set and forget bike. So TT bikes you only really use in time trials, which is fair enough really. They're not useful for regular Zwift racing because you don't get to draft people using a time trial bike. So yeah, the only reason I can think for using a time trial bike in a normal Zwift race is if you want to do the most aggressive strategy in the world and just go for like a solo break straight away. So yeah, TT bikes generally not advised for Zwift racing. So gravel and mountain bikes. So these are best for the rough surfaces like the jungle areas and places like that. These ones aren't generally as used as the road bikes or the lightweight bikes. I would say probably not worth buying unless you're doing a lot of riding on those specific routes which have a lot of rough ground. Okay, that's it for bikes. Next one we are going to talk about is trainer difficulty. So this is a setting that you will see in your Zwift menu. So you can choose between 0% and 100%. So this one's a bit confusing. This one doesn't affect how much power you're putting out, but it just affects how difficult hills feel. So if you set your trainer difficulty to max, climbing the hills in the game will feel exactly how they feel in real life. But for example, if you set it to 50%, it would only feel half as hard as it does in real life. So effectively what it's doing is just changing your gear ratio. So it's just adding like an extra big cassette on the back of your bike. That's effectively what it's doing. You still have to put out the same amount of power and you'll still go the same speed. It just affects your cadence really. So this is an important one to set right, because if you're doing a really hilly route, for example, you will have to do a lot of gear changes and maybe you don't want to do that. So this one's completely up to you really. I like to set mine about 33% because I am lazy and I don't like changing my gears very much. Okay, next one is hidden game mechanics. So there's quite a few of these. We've got the super tuck, sticky draft, and avatar lag. So let's get into the super tuck. So as you can see in the picture, when your little man goes into this extreme aero position, you are in the super tuck. So you need a few conditions to be true for this to happen. If you're traveling faster than 58 kilometers per hour and the gradient is at least -3% and the power is less than 11 watts. If all of these are true, you will go into a super tuck. So what this means is your man will go into this position and he'll be super aerodynamic and he'll go really fast down hills. So this lets you have a little rest really. Other people will still be pedaling, but you will still be going about the same speed as them. So this is really useful for descending. And honestly, this is a very useful skill to know. Just make sure you're really focused, because if you don't start pedaling when you come out of the super tuck, you'll slow down really, really quickly. So you've got to be on it, got to be focusing. Okay, next one is the sticky draft. So this one makes it easier to stay in the draft. So what the sticky draft does is if you're following someone, there is a wattage window where your man will stay behind him regardless of what power you're putting out. So for example, if you're following someone who's putting out 300 watts, then the wattage window may be between like 270 and 230 watts. And whatever amount of watts you put out within that window, you'll stay behind the person in front. So this can either be a good thing or an annoying thing. If you're trying to overtake someone, you need to put a quick burst of power to break the draft effect, so the game knows you want to overtake him and not just sit in the draft. And you can also use it to save energy. So if you're following someone, try to put out as few watts as possible before you start dropping off. If you're putting out like 250 watts, maybe you can drop it to like 240 and see if you stay behind him. If you do, then that's fine. If not, then you need to put down a bit more power. So this one's a bit confusing, but it's something you pick up as you play the game. Okay, next one is avatar lag. So when you're riding, it takes a little while before your man moves when you put down the power. This one takes a little while to get used to. So for example, when you start sprinting, your guy will take like a second or two before he starts speeding up. This is good because other people will take a little while to react to what you're doing. So it's important to keep an eye on the numbers on the side of the screen, because this will update much quicker than the avatar moves. So these numbers don't lag, but the avatars do. So if you see someone is putting down like 10 watts per kilogram, you know he's started his sprint even if his avatar hasn't moved. So as soon as the numbers on the right change, you should start reacting really. Don't wait for the bikes on the screen to move away from you before you react. Okay, what's next? Keyboard shortcuts. These ones are pretty useful just for saving yourself a bit of time. If you memorize these, you can just like tap rather than having to go into menus. So this only works if you're using a PC or a Mac. So it's much easier to use the keyboard than using your phone or the companion app. So I've put a link in the description to all of the keyboard shortcuts. This one probably won't make or break your race. It's not the most important one, but it's quite useful to know. Okay, so finally we are on to advanced tips. So let's have a look here. So Zwiftpower is very cool. It's a website and it lets you see your progress and it lets you see all the race details in much more detail than you can in the Zwift app. You can also see who you're racing against. You can see your rankings compared to other people. So yeah, Zwiftpower is pretty cool. So you can also use it to stalk your rivals before the race. So if you find the race you've entered, you can have a list of all the people who've entered. So you can see what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and then you can use this in your race strategy. You can see the race quality. What this means is it takes like an average, so it takes like a metric of how good the average person in the race is, and then you can see which races are harder, which races are good, because there might be many different C-class races, for example, but depending on who enters it, it could be more difficult or easier, depending on how good the riders are. So you can also use Zwiftpower Live, and this is quite useful because you can see a much more detailed leaderboard. The standard one in Zwift is pretty annoying and it's hard to use during races. There's lots of things wrong with this, but I won't go into details. Anyway, you can get the Zwiftpower Live leaderboard up. It only updates every 30 seconds, but there's so much more detail in what's going on in the race. You can see gaps more easily. You can see the whole list of people in the race. It's just so much more detailed and it's much easier to read than the one on the right. Okay, so there is one more advanced tip. This one is called Source for Zwift. So this one's very recent actually. It's only been around for like a month. So what this one does is it's like an overlay you can put on top of Zwift and you can customize it to show what you want. So for example, you can see your average power, your max power, all of these stats which you can't see in regular Zwift, and you can customize it so much, you can get so much more detail. One more thing this does is it shows you how well you're drafting, how effective your drafting is. So this is important if you're like following someone. I've never actually used this in a race yet. I've only used it in free rides just to see what it's like. What else it does is it shows the groups as well. So if there's like 5 riders up the road, it will show 5 and then what their average power is and like how far ahead they are. You can also see your competitors' stats live. This one is a bit contentious really. You can see like your rival's power, you can see their heart rate data, you can see pretty much anything. Whether or not this is cheating or not has not really been decided. Personally, I think it's fine if you're just using it for adjusting the UI. Like, for example, you can set it to show your 20-minute power, your average power. That is information you can get just by having your bike computer in front of you. So I think that's fair. I think if it's information about you, you should be able to use it really. What I think is maybe not as fair is seeing other riders' information. Like, I don't think you should use it to see other riders' heart rate data, other riders' power data, for example. Like, if someone's really struggling with a really high heart rate, I think it's unfair if you know that. So personally, I'm not sure how this is going to go in the future. Maybe we'll see it get banned, but hopefully not. It's definitely good to see your own data. And it's good for practicing your draft, I think. Yeah, so I have some mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, the UI is so much better this way. On the other hand, getting all that information is probably not fair. I don't think I'll use this in races, to be honest, because races, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right. So I think I'm going to make a more in-depth video on Source for Zwift because this is a pretty cool piece of software and it does show what Zwift could do if they wanted to, basically. So that is everything. So thank you all for watching. If you liked it and learned something new, then please like and subscribe. Also, you can whack your own tips in the comments below if there's some which I've forgotten. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next one.